Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member David Tandem.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very happy to continue the agreeable nature of this debate that Mr. Cunliffe has just referred to. This is a useful piece of legislation. It does some good and will do no harm, unlike some of the bills we see emanating from this government. It's important. Clearly, the genesis of this bill was a perceived need to protect both charities who were employing third-party collectors basically from being ripped off, to protect them against some of the more unscrupulous operators, recognising that some charities are run by some relatively unsophisticated people in a commercial or in a business sense. It was also important too, and it was seen to be at the time and still is, that we retain a very high level of public confidence that when they make a donation to charity, the substantial amount of that money will actually land in the coffers of that charity. We saw too many examples some years ago, and I note in fact this first reading of this bill was in December 2009, but there did seem to be a spate at that time, some visibility, some publicity about some out-and-out rip-offs of charities by people who ought to have been working for them. We note that there are something over 23,000 charities in New Zealand, registered charities, and somehow I suspect many of them at some stage have had a turn on Lambton Quay on a Friday morning. As a non-Wellingtonian, I've noticed with interest that whenever I'm in Wellington on Friday, I take care to have a few coins. Inevitably, there will be somebody gathering along the quay, and that's a good thing. I mean, they're all good worthy causes, and it's indicative, I think, of people's willingness both to contribute money, and of course the people doing the collecting very often are volunteers, people working in a voluntary capacity. I think we have to acknowledge that charitable and voluntary sector does an incredible amount of unpaid work in this economy, in this society of ours, and without it we would be the poorer in very many ways. I think any of us holding portfolios as spokespeople or indeed as ministers would be hard-pressed to find a portfolio area that at some point, at some level, at some context, didn't rely on the goodwill, the contributed time, labour, energy and skills of volunteers and people working not for personal gain, but simply because it's the right thing to do. In my own area, in corrections, there are some extremely effective organisations, voluntary community-based organisations, none of whom have deep pockets or significant wealth coming to them, do a remarkable amount of very good work and indeed pick up the slack that sometimes governments and indeed the private sector leave behind. In the business area, we see Business Mentors, an organisation who actively work to support new businesses, new startups, not for gain, simply because that's the right thing to do. People have been through hard times themselves and they want to remember in that, they want to assist others. So it is important we have a high level of protection of the charities who are absolutely dependent in many cases and increasingly dependent on charitable donations, given that unfortunately money from the government, both central and local government, has tended to dry up in recent years. There are fewer grants available, the bar has been raised, it's become much more difficult for charities of all sorts to rely on funding from government. And that is a two-edged sword. It's disappointing to see that worthy charities that are being underfunded, but equally it does encourage them to go out and generate their own incomes. So there is a degree of merit in that. So we are very happy to continue supporting this bill as we have since it was first presented by Amy Adams, and we should acknowledge it was her private member's bill that she brought to the House, though several years ago. We will... excuse me, I am corrected by one of the longer memories in the House, the member's bill indeed, yes. It is a good piece of legislation. We've supported it. We had some minor reservations initially and they have been recognised. There were issues, the apparent simplicity of the rule making to say we will cut in at certain levels, certain thresholds. Clearly that didn't, once we delved into the complexity of the sector, it became apparent that a more subtle approach needed to be taken. The regulatory approach involving ministerial discretion, if you like, it seems to be the best available outcome to us. So yes, acknowledging then this is a good piece of legislation, we will support it. We will also continue to support other legislation bills that seek to improve fair trading, consumer rights in New Zealand. We do have a reasonably robust protection for consumers. Our fair trade legislation is reasonably robust by international standards, but some of it is also dated, some of it is not kept up with modern forms of exchange, of sale and purchase, be it in voluntary sector or indeed just in the straight commercial sector. So we're very happy to continue to support legislation that genuinely gives consumers a better break, that protects people in the commercial and most certainly to protect those working in the voluntary and charitable sector. So we're very happy to give our support to this bill. Thank you.
I call the Honourable Member Sam Lutuinga.